At 4:30 p.m. on May 20th, 2023, the on-duty phone at the Cochise County Sheriff's Department in Arizona rang. Lieutenant John Williams, the officer on duty, answered the phone to a crime report. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman in a state of extreme panic. She identified herself as Maria Sanchez, born in 1980, a resident of the rural community of Dos Cabezas. Ms. Sanchez reported that she had just discovered what she believed to be a human hand protruding from the ground in her family's mesquite grove. The caller suspected the body might be that of her mother, Elena Rodriguez, whom the family had reported missing 2 months prior. Recognizing the severity of the report of potential murder and concealed burial, Lieutenant Williams immediately relayed the incident to his superiors. Upon receiving the report, County Sheriff Captain David Miller took direct command of what he deemed a top priority case. Within 15 minutes, an emergency meeting was called in the unit's conference room for a quick case briefing. Attendees included the Sheriff's Department command staff, a representative from the Cochise County Attorney's Office, and the heads of the operational divisions. After hearing a detailed report on the phone call, Captain Miller gave his initial directives. A special task force was immediately established. Detective Mark Davis, head of the Criminal Investigations Division CID, was appointed as the task force leader, responsible for investigating the case. Captain Miller emphasized in a firm voice that the most immediate and urgent task was to secure the scene. He ordered the task force to move immediately to Dos Cabezas, coordinate with local deputies to establish a security perimeter, and prevent unauthorized access to the area. The forensics and crime scene investigation units were to prepare all necessary equipment. He stressed that they must act quickly but with extreme caution, as any mistake at the initial scene could compromise the entire investigation. At exactly 5 p.m., a convoy of 3 vehicles, a command vehicle, a CID detective vehicle, and a specialized crime scene unit van left the sheriff's headquarters with sirens blaring. The initial task force consisted of 12 officers, including experienced investigators from the CID led by Detective Davis and his deputy, Sergeant Chris Evans. Forensics officers and a medical examiner from the State Forensic Center were also summoned. The 20-mile journey from Wilcox to Dos Cabezas was a race against time. The single, winding road, with many degraded sections, prevented the convoy from traveling at high speed. Detective Davis sat in the command vehicle, his face grim, already forming a series of questions and initial hypotheses. Who was the victim? Was it really Elena Rodriguez? If so, why was she murdered and buried here? Who was the perpetrator, and what was their connection to the victim? After 2 months, what valuable evidence might still remain? By the time the convoy reached the small community center in Dos Cabezas, dusk had begun to fall. Local sheriff's deputies, led by the area's senior deputy, were already on standby with Maria Sanchez. As soon as she saw the task force, Ms. Sanchez was again overcome with emotion, rushing forward, her face pale with fear and grief. Detective Davis stepped out of the vehicle and introduced himself. He asked what the situation was up there and if anyone else had been to the site. The senior local deputy reported that as soon as they received the order, they had sent 2 deputies to set up a checkpoint at the base of the hill to keep onlookers away. Currently, only Ms. Sanchez was at the scene. Detective Davis nodded in approval and asked Ms. Sanchez to lead them up. He instructed the rest of the team to deploy according to the plan. Leaving the vehicles behind, the group began to walk up a narrow, steep trail. The faint light of dusk was not enough to see clearly, forcing the officers to use their tactical flashlights. The mountain air grew chilly. After a strenuous 20-minute climb, a distinct foul odor signaled their arrival. The scene was a relatively flat area on the hillside, surrounded by mesquite trees. Under the flashlight beams, an area of about 50 square meters had been cordoned off with police tape. Detective Davis signaled for everyone to stop outside the perimeter. He, the medical examiner, and the head of the forensics unit, Officer Paul Carter, put on gloves, shoe covers, and protective gear before cautiously stepping inside. The smell of decomposition was now overwhelming. At the center of the scene, under a mesquite tree, was a sunken patch of ground about 3 feet in diameter. The soil showed signs of having been hastily dug up and refilled. A portion of the dirt had been disturbed, revealing a horrific sight: the right hand of a human in an advanced state of decomposition, sticking out of the ground at a 45-degree angle. The skin and flesh had almost completely decomposed, exposing the whitish bone structure. The wrist had numerous scratches and tears, showing signs of being gnawed by animals. Nearby were several fresh dog tracks. Officer Carter observed that it looked like an animal had dug it up, likely a stray dog that had smelled the body. The medical examiner knelt to observe the hand up close. He noted that based on the level of decomposition, the time of death could be several months ago, consistent with the 2-month missing person report. He identified the hand as belonging to an older female, based on the small bone structure. Detective Davis stood up, sweeping his flashlight over the surrounding area. He noticed that the hillside soil was hard and full of gravel, but the soil in the burial area was very loose. It seemed the perpetrator had dug a shallow hole, just deep enough to cover the body, suggesting a hasty act of concealment. While the forensics team began collecting soil samples, searching for trace evidence, and documenting the scene, Detective Davis went to take an official statement from Maria Sanchez. Sergeant Chris Evans sat down to take notes. Detective Davis asked Ms. Sanchez to tell him in detail about her mother's disappearance and the relationships within her family, especially with her sister-in-law, Isabella Sanchez. Trying to remain calm, Ms. Sanchez recounted her story. Her mother, Elena Rodriguez, was 63. Her father had passed away long ago, and Elena raised her and her brother, Carlos, by herself. Carlos, 30, was married to Isabella Sanchez, 25, from the same community. They had a 5-year-old son. Carlos worked on an oil rig in Texas and only came home twice a year, sending money back for his wife and son. At home, Elena lived with them to help look after her grandson. When asked about the relationship between her mother and Isabella, Maria sighed with clear disapproval. She said her mother loved Isabella like her own daughter. Elena was a gentle person who never raised her voice. She treated Isabella well, but Isabella was lazy and entitled. With Carlos away, Isabella lived like a queen while Elena handled everything from ranch work to cooking. Yet, Isabella often showed a bad attitude and was disrespectful. Maria had often heard her scolding Elena for being slow and forgetful. When Maria tried to intervene, Isabella told her to stay out of her family's business. Detective Davis pressed further, asking if there were any deeper reasons for friction. Maria affirmed there were. She stated that Isabella was not a decent woman. While her husband worked hard, she had been secretly seeing another man from the village, an unmarried man named Hector Gonzalez. The whole community had been gossiping about it. Maria believed her mother knew and tried to advise Isabella against it, which caused the conflict between them to grow. She believed this was the main reason for what happened. Maria Sanchez's statement outlined a clear motive for the crime: a cheating daughter-in-law, discovered by her mother-in-law, who refused to heed advice and developed a grudge. Detective Davis asked what happened on May 17, 2023, the day her mother disappeared. Maria explained that there was an anniversary gathering at a cousin's house that her mother attended in the morning. That afternoon, she tried to call her mother but couldn't get through. The next afternoon, she went to their house but didn't see her mother. Isabella said her mother had left the previous morning and hadn't returned. Her attitude was strangely calm, without a hint of worry. This made Maria suspicious from the start. A normal person would have been frantic if their elderly mother-in-law went missing overnight, not so indifferent. Detective Davis nodded as the details began to connect. The investigation was now focused almost entirely on 2 suspects, Isabella Sanchez and her lover, Hector Gonzalez. By the time the interview concluded, it was completely dark. The forensics team had finished examining the surface. High-power floodlights were brought up, illuminating the hillside. All preparations were complete for the most critical moment, the exhumation. Detective Davis gave the order for all units to get in position and begin the exhumation. Under the cold, white light of 2 high-power floodlights, the area under the mesquite tree transformed into an outdoor laboratory. The work was conducted in near-total silence, broken only by the crackle of radios and the click of cameras. Detective Mark Davis stood outside the perimeter, his sharp eyes observing every movement, knowing the next few hours would provide the foundation for charging the perpetrator. The medical examiner and 2 forensics officers carried out the excavation using specialized tools like trowels and brushes. Each layer of soil was carefully removed and sifted for any evidence, no matter how small. The process was slow and tense. After about 45 minutes, at a depth of about a foot, the shape of a body wrapped in an old, green military-style top began to emerge. The top was rotten and covered in damp earth. The smell of death intensified, forcing everyone to wear double-layered surgical masks. The medical examiner signaled a stop to photograph the scene. After documenting the position, the final layer of soil was removed, fully exposing the body. The victim was in a fetal position, lying on her right side, her knees almost touching her chin, a posture indicating she had been shoved into a hastily dug hole. The medical examiner carefully cut away the top. The victim was wearing a set of dark brown linen clothes, common in rural areas. He began his preliminary examination at the scene. The deceased was a female, approximately 5 feet 1 inch tall, aged between 60 and 65, with mostly grey hair tied in a bun. The stage of decomposition was advanced, with skin and soft tissues almost completely gone in exposed areas like the face, neck, and hands. He carefully examined the head but found no signs of injury on the skull. He then shifted his attention to the neck. Using specialized forceps, he gently manipulated the neck bones. He announced that the hyoid bone in the neck was fractured, a characteristic sign of strangulation. He stated with near certainty that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. This discovery strongly corroborated the initial hypothesis. This was a murder. The medical examiner continued his inspection. There were fractures on the 7th and 8th ribs on the left side, suggesting the victim may have been pushed or struck with great force. The right wrist showed signs of subcutaneous bruising, indicating a struggle or restraint. Every finding helped reconstruct the victim's final, painful moments. She had been pushed down, held, and strangled. The details aligned alarmingly well with the logic deduced from Maria's testimony. While the autopsy was underway, Detective Davis had another team expand their search across the hillside for related evidence like footprints, bloodstains, or a weapon. However, after 2 months of exposure to the elements, the search yielded no results, as the task force had anticipated. The most important clue was the body itself. At 10 p.m., the on-site examination was mostly complete. All evidence was collected, bagged, and labeled. The victim's body was placed in a specialized body bag and carried down the hill to be transported to the State Forensic Center for a full autopsy and DNA identification. Detective Davis took one last look at the now desolate and silent scene. He ordered local deputies to continue guarding the area until further notice before he and the task force withdrew. On the way back to headquarters, the atmosphere in the vehicle was tense. The images from the scene were haunting, but there was no time for emotion. The investigation had only just begun. At 11:30 p.m., another emergency case briefing was held in the SID's office. Despite the late hour, all members of the task force were present, their faces showing grim determination. Detective Davis stood before a whiteboard, summarizing the initial findings. He presented a few preliminary conclusions. 1. The body was almost certainly that of Elena Rodriguez. 2. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation, specifically a fractured hyoid bone. 3. Other injuries, such as broken ribs, indicated a struggle. 4. The scene suggested a hasty and unprofessional concealment of the body. He continued, stating that from the testimony of Maria Sanchez, they had identified 2 primary suspects, Isabella Sanchez, 25, the victim's daughter-in-law, and Hector Gonzalez, 27, Isabella's lover. The motive likely stemmed from Ms. Rodriguez discovering their illicit relationship. Detective Davis laid out the next course of action. He stressed that time was of the essence, as the suspects might flee once they learned the body had been found. He proposed bringing in both Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez for questioning that night. To prevent them from colluding, they would split into 2 teams and act simultaneously. The plan was unanimously approved. Sergeant Chris Evans would lead the first team to approach Hector Gonzalez's home. Detective Davis would personally lead the second team to Ms. Rodriguez's house, where Isabella Sanchez was living. Detective Davis emphasized that the operation must be covert and swift. For now, they were only inviting them to the station to clarify details regarding Ms. Rodriguez's disappearance. He wanted to avoid causing public alarm and ensure the safety of everyone involved. At 12:30 a.m. on May 21st, 2023, 2 unmarked cars silently left the sheriff's department, melting into the night and heading back towards Dos Cabezas. Detective Davis knew the next few hours would be decisive. He gave the order over the radio for all teams to move out, stating they needed both suspects in custody before sunrise. The news that the sheriff's department had brought a large convoy to Dos Cabezas and was excavating on the Rodriguez ranch could not remain a secret in a small community. Rumors began to spread with the speed of a desert wind. In those whispers, Two names were mentioned most often: Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez. Isabella Sanchez didn't need to wait for the rumors. From the moment a neighbor called, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity about the police sealing off a mesquite grove, she knew the secret she had kept for 2 months was out. Panic seized Isabella, but her cold, calculating mind quickly suppressed the fear. She knew there was no time to panic. They had found the body, which meant they would be coming for her. Her only thought was to run. The first thing she did was call Hector Gonzalez on a cheap burner phone they used for secret communication. Hector's voice was groggy with sleep. Isabella's voice was an urgent hiss. She told him they had found her, that the cops were on the hill and had dug up the body. She warned him that if he wanted to live, he had to run, right now. On the other end, Hector Gonzalez was instantly wide awake. He was trembling with desperation, asking what they should do. Isabella snapped at him not to panic and gave him instructions. Go home, grab cash and ID, and wear light clothes. At exactly 1 a.m., he was to take the trail behind the village to the old cottonwood tree at the edge of the woods, where she would wait. She told him not to tell anyone and to get rid of the phone immediately. He asked where they would run. Across the border, into Mexico, she replied decisively. Living in a border region, she knew it was their only way out. She urged him to hurry. With that, Isabella hung up, broke their SIM card, and threw the phone's battery away. She moved with frightening urgency, ransacking her closet, stuffing clothes, cash, and jewelry into a bag. She glanced at her son, sleeping soundly on the bed. A flicker of hesitation was quickly replaced by steely resolve. She couldn't take him, he would be a burden. Meanwhile, at the sheriff's department, the atmosphere remained intense. Detective Mark Davis was adamant that they couldn't delay another second. He divided his forces into 2 teams. He ordered Sergeant Evans to lead Team 1 to Hector Gonzalez's house, while he would lead Team 2 to Isabella Sanchez's residence. The actions had to be simultaneous, precisely at 1 a.m. They had to bring both suspects back to the station safely. 2 unmarked cars once again rolled silently into the night. The race between law enforcement and the fleeing criminals had begun. 15 minutes before 1 a.m., Isabella Sanchez was ready. She bent down, kissed her son's forehead one last time, then silently opened the back door and disappeared into the darkness. At the same time, Hector Gonzalez was in a frantic rush. Fear made him clumsy. He knocked over a stack of dishes, causing a loud crash. Startled, he bolted out the door, running for his life. At exactly 1 a.m., the 2 teams from the Cochise County Sheriff's Department arrived at their targets. At Hector Gonzalez's house, Sergeant Chris Evans's team found no answer. They breached the door to find the house empty. Belongings were strewn about, and shattered dishes indicated a hasty departure. Sergeant Evans reported immediately over the radio that subject Hector Gonzalez had fled. At the same time, Detective Davis's team faced a similar situation at Elena Rodriguez's house. When they forced the door open, they heard a child crying from the 2nd floor. In Isabella's bedroom, they found her young son sitting on the bed, sobbing. Isabella Sanchez was gone. On the bedside table was a hastily scribbled note. Maria, I have to go away for a while. Please take care of my son for me. Detective Davis clenched his teeth. He had been 1 step behind. The cunning and ruthlessness of this woman exceeded his expectations. He announced over the radio that subject Isabella Sanchez had also fled. The scene indicated they had a plan and had left only a short time ago. Standing in the empty room, Detective Davis gazed out the window, looking north toward the rugged mountain ranges that formed the natural border with Mexico. For a fugitive from this part of Arizona, there was only one way to go. He raised his radio and issued decisive orders. He reported to command that both subjects had fled, likely heading for the US-Mexico border. He requested a nationwide arrest warrant for both on charges of murder. At the same time, he asked them to contact federal liaisons to send an urgent request to law enforcement in the corresponding border region of Mexico, providing the subjects information and requesting their cooperation in a manhunt. The murder investigation had now become a cross-border manhunt. The decisive order from Detective Mark Davis kicked off a pursuit at the highest level. Information about the 2 fugitives, along with their descriptions and mugshots, was sent to all law enforcement agencies. A nationwide warrant was issued, with posters displayed at transportation hubs and border crossings. U.S. Border Patrol stations along the Arizona-Mexico border were put on high alert. Back in Dos Cabezas, Elena Rodriguez's house and Hector Gonzalez's home were reclassified as secondary crime scenes. Detective Davis left Sergeant Chris Evans and a team to conduct an emergency search for any clue that might reveal their escape plan. Meanwhile, Detective Davis returned to headquarters. He knew this manhunt was now beyond the scope of a single county. An emergency briefing was conducted with the state's Department of Public Safety DPS. DPS directed the State Bureau of Investigation and the Immigration Enforcement Division to get involved and requested that federal agencies ask for cooperation from Mexican authorities. An expedited request, along with an international arrest warrant, was sent out by early morning. The race was now against time and space, stretching across two nations. While the wheels of justice turned, the two fugitives were facing their own battle for survival. After meeting at the old Cartonwood tree, Isabella grabbed Hector's hand and pulled him along, running headlong towards the limestone mountains to the south. The path Isabella chose was a treacherous route known only to smugglers, winding through mountain crevices to avoid border patrol checkpoints. Under the dim moonlight, the two struggled with every step. Sharp branches whipped their faces, and loose gravel caused Hector to stumble several times. He was exhausted from fear and fatigue. Isabella urged him to hurry up, her voice a tense hiss, asking if he wanted to get caught. The coldness of his lover frightened Hector. He realized the woman pulling him through the night was more terrifying than the wilderness. He could only grit his teeth and follow. After more than 3 hours, they reached a mountain pass. Isabella signaled a stop. In the distance, flashlight beams swept across the landscape, and the barking of K9 units echoed. A border patrol team was heading towards them. Hector dropped to the ground, trembling uncontrollably. Isabella pulled him into a rocky crevice, clamped her hand over his mouth, and signaled for silence. They held their breath as the sound of footsteps and voices grew closer. Luckily, the patrol passed by without discovering them. When it was quiet again, they collapsed on the ground, drenched in sweat. They didn't rest for long. After crossing the final slope, a border marker stood before them. They were on Mexican soil. A temporary sense of safety was immediately followed by bewilderment. They were in a foreign country, knowing no one, with little money and only the clothes on their backs. Meanwhile, at the secondary crime scenes, Sergeant Evans's team had made a discovery. At Isabella's house, in an old notebook tucked inside a cookbook, investigators found an unfamiliar phone number and an address written in Spanish, Mercado Central, Agua Prieta. This was immediately reported to Detective Davis. He ordered a high-tech crime unit to verify the phone number, and the address was added to the request sent to Mexican authorities. It was the first concrete lead. 2 days after crossing the border, Isabella and Hector reached Agua Prieta, a bustling border city in Sonora. They didn't have much money and found a dilapidated boarding house near the Mercado Central, an area with many undocumented workers. The language barrier, fear, and financial pressure quickly caused friction between them. Hector became increasingly panicked, spending his days drinking and lamenting. He constantly blamed Isabella for inciting him to kill. During a drunken rage, Hector screamed that it was all her fault. Isabella looked at her weak-willed lover with contempt. She told him to shut up, that it was no time for crying. They needed to find a way to make money and move deeper into the country. But Isabella's caution was no match for the reach of the law. After receiving the request from the US, the police in Agua Prieta took action. They canvassed hotels and motels, paying special attention to areas with large populations of undocumented residents. Information about the 2 murder suspects was distributed to every neighborhood watch and boarding house manager. The owner of the boarding house where Isabella and Hector were staying recognized his 2 new tenants from the descriptions. A secret phone call was made to the nearest police station. On the afternoon of May 27, 2023, 6 days after the crime was discovered, Isabella went out to buy food, leaving Hector alone. She had no idea that an invisible net had tightened around them. Dozens of plainclothes Mexican police officers had secretly surrounded the boarding house. In the room, Hector was drinking alone when the door was kicked open. Several large police officers burst in and swiftly subdued him. He was too shocked to react. At the same time, Isabella was walking back to the boarding house. About 50 yards away, she stopped. A criminal's instinct told her something was wrong. There were too many strangers with strong builds loitering around. She immediately turned to escape into the market crowd, but it was too late. A female officer in plain clothes had already closed in on her. The officer shouted for her to stop. Isabella frantically dropped her bag and bolted, but she was quickly tackled by two male officers. The escape of the adulterous couple had officially ended. That evening, at the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, Detective Mark Davis received an important phone call from the federal liaison. Their counterparts in Mexico had successfully apprehended both subjects, Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez, in Agua Prieta. They were processing the paperwork to extradite them back to the US as soon as possible. The news of the capture reached the task force late on the afternoon of May 27th. The atmosphere in the CID briefing room, tense for nearly a week, finally eased. The most difficult phase, the cross-border manhunt, had concluded successfully. However, Detective Mark Davis knew this was only halfway. Complex legal and diplomatic procedures were initiated with unprecedented urgency. Federal liaisons worked tirelessly with Mexican authorities. A special task force, including Detective Davis, prosecutors from the county attorney's office, and U.S. Marshals, was formed to prepare for the extradition. After 3 days of continuous work, all procedures were completed. The handover was set for 9 a.m., May 30th, 2023, at the Douglas Port of Entry. That morning, security at the port of entry was stricter than usual. The Cochise County Task Force, led by Detective Davis, was present early. At exactly 9 a.m., a convoy from the Mexican police entered the handover area. Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez were escorted out. Both were dressed in detainee clothing, their hands cuffed, their faces gaunt. When they saw the familiar uniforms of American law enforcement, their emotions were starkly different. Hector Gonzalez hung his head low, trembling. Isabella Sanchez, after a fleeting moment of fear, showed a cold resignation. The handover was swift but formal. Representatives signed the necessary documents. When the Mexican handcuffs were removed and replaced with those of the U.S. Marshals, judicial sovereignty was executed. Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez were officially in U.S. custody. They were escorted to 2 separate transport vehicles. The convoy immediately departed, taking the 2 killers back to the Cochise County Jail. Sitting in the vehicle, passing the familiar landscapes of southern Arizona, they must have felt the depth of their despair. All hopes for a new life had vanished. Ahead lay only cold jail cells and a severe sentence. That same afternoon, the first official interrogation on U.S. soil was conducted. The task force decided to confront Hector Gonzalez first, identifying him as the psychologically weaker link. In an interrogation room, Hector sat opposite Sergeant Chris Evans and another investigator. Sergeant Evans didn't need complex techniques. He simply placed photos from the exhumation scene in front of Hector, especially a close-up of Elena Rodriguez's hand. Seeing the images, Hector Gonzalez broke down, sobbing that he was guilty and sorry for what he did. Sergeant Evans told him that now was the time to face the truth. This was his only chance for any leniency, reminding him that the roles of mastermind and perpetrator were entirely different. That statement hit its mark. Hector nodded and confessed everything in even more detail than during his interrogation in Mexico. He spoke of the affair, Isabella's resentment toward her mother-in-law, and the fateful afternoon. He described being caught by Ms. Rodriguez and Isabella's deadly incitement to kill her. He recounted the act of strangling the victim, the panic, and the cover-up plan orchestrated entirely by Isabella. He also confessed to the escape process, placing all the blame on his lover. Hector Gonzalez's statement lasted over 3 hours. With this comprehensive confession, the task force was armed to face the true mastermind, Isabella Sanchez. The interrogation of Isabella Sanchez was led by Detective Davis himself. Unlike Hector, Isabella appeared calm and answered questions tersely. She admitted to being at the scene and fleeing with Hector. However, when asked about her role in the murder, she began to act. She claimed she didn't kill her mother-in-law, that it was Hector who lost control. She said she was so scared that she had to run away with him. Detective Davis gave a slight, cold smile. He pointed out that her actions showed the opposite of fear. She was the one who warned Hector, planned the escape, and callously abandoned her child. He asked if a scared person acted with such decisiveness. Isabella fell silent, only repeating that Hector had acted on his own. Detective Davis continued, asking how she explained his statement. He told her Hector had confessed that she was the one who whispered in his ear to kill her. Isabella shouted that he was lying, that he was a coward trying to pin everything on her. Detective Davis signaled an officer to press play on a recording device. The audio of Hector Gonzalez's confession filled the room. His trembling, fearful voice echoed in the small space as he recounted Isabella leaning close to his ear and telling him to kill her, to get rid of her so no one would ever know. Hearing her lover's confession, Isabella Sanchez's composed facade finally shattered. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Her only accomplice had completely betrayed her. "That bastard," Isabella hissed through gritted teeth. Detective Davis turned off the device. He asked if she had anything else to say, pointing out that all the evidence was against her. Isabella Sanchez slumped forward onto the table. Her defense had completely crumbled. After a long silence, she looked up, her eyes holding not remorse, but a frightening emptiness. "Yes," she said, her voice icy, "I told him to do it." After that admission, Isabella confessed everything. Her account was consistent with Hector's but delivered with a chilling calmness, as if narrating an unrelated story. There were no tears, no hint of remorse. By early morning, the first 2 official confessions in the US were completed. The case was essentially solved. Detective Davis left the interrogation room, his face etched with fatigue but his eyes determined. He told Sergeant Evans that the confessions were complete and to prepare for the crime scene reconstruction the next morning to solidify every detail. At 7 a.m. on October 1st, 2023, the atmosphere at the Cochise County Jail was tense. It was the day of the crime scene reconstruction. Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez were brought out from their separate cells, looking more haggard than ever. A large convoy was ready, including the task force, representatives from the county attorney's office, defense lawyers, and a large contingent of deputies to provide security. News of the killer's capture had sparked extreme public outrage. When the convoy arrived in Dos Cabezas, hundreds of people were crowded along the road leading to Elena Rodriguez's house, their eyes filled with anger. Deputies had to form a human barricade to clear a path. The first reconstruction site was Elena Rodriguez's house. Hector Gonzalez was brought in first. He walked through the familiar gate, a place he had once snuck through for his affair, now entering as a murderer reenacting his crime. Inside, a female detective played the role of the victim. Detective Davis instructed Hector to reenact all his actions from the afternoon of May 17, 2023. Under the lens of 2 cameras and the supervision of a prosecutor, Hector mechanically reenacted each action, from receiving Isabella's call to being caught by Ms. Rodriguez. When it came to reenacting the murder, his body shook violently. He knelt, his hands reaching out and then retracting, stammering incoherently. When asked what Isabella said at that moment, Hector confessed again through tears that she told him to kill her. He demonstrated how she had whispered in his ear, followed by the act of strangulation. After Hector completed his part, he was taken out, and Isabella Sanchez was brought in. She appeared emotionless, performing her actions coldly. When asked to reenact her words of incitement, she repeated the deadly phrase in a dry tone. Her cruelty sent a chill down the spines of those present. The reconstruction continued at the Mesquite Grove, where both suspects separately reenacted carrying and burying the body. Under the harsh autumn sun, reenacting the concealment of their crime was a form of psychological torture. Hector Gonzalez fainted and required medical attention. Isabella Sanchez maintained her indifferent attitude to the end. By mid-afternoon, the crime scene reconstruction was complete. The results perfectly matched the confessions, solidifying the evidence. Returning to headquarters, the task force worked without rest. Based on all the evidence, the Cochise County Sheriff's Department completed its final investigation report. The report, over 100 pages long, affirmed that the actions of Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez constituted murder with multiple aggravating factors, including savagery, extreme cruelty, and a depraved motive. On October 15, 2023, the entire case file was transferred to the Cochise County Attorney's Office with a recommendation to prosecute the 2 defendants to the fullest extent of the law. At the County Attorney's Office, prosecutors meticulously studied the case file. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. The roles of Isabella Sanchez as the instigator and Hector Gonzalez as the perpetrator were clearly established. After 2 weeks, the Cochise County Attorney's Office issued an indictment, charging Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez with first-degree murder. The indictment was a judgment on paper, a voice demanding justice for the deceased. The case file was then transferred to the Cochise County Superior Court for trial. In the county jail, the days of waiting for trial were long and heavy. Hector Gonzalez grew thin and listless, accepting his fate. Isabella Sanchez maintained a calm exterior, but sleepless nights showed that fear was gnawing at her soul. Finally, nearly 3 months after the crime was brought to light, the court summons was sent. The day of judgment for Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez was set. On November 25, 2023, the Cochise County Superior Court convened the trial. From early morning, hundreds of people gathered in front of the courthouse. Security was tightened. Inside, the air was thick with tension. In the front row sat Maria and her brother Carlos, representing the victim's family, holding a portrait of their mother. At 9 a.m., the presiding judge entered and declared the trial open. The two defendants, Isabella Sanchez and Hector Gonzalez, were led to the defendant's table. Hector kept his head down. Isabella held her head high, her cold eyes scanning the room. The representative from the county attorney's office read the indictment, starkly laying bare the entire criminal process. The courtroom was plunged into silence, broken only by the stifled sobs of the victim's family. The trial moved to the examination phase. When questioned, Hector Gonzalez tremblingly admitted to all criminal acts. He claimed he was incited by Isabella Sanchez while in a state of panic. Through tears, Hector said he knew his crime was unforgivable. He bowed his head, pleaded guilty, and apologized to the spirit of Ms. Rodriguez and her family. He asked the court for a chance to live, to atone for his mistake. When it was Isabella Sanchez's turn, the atmosphere grew more tense. She answered evasively, admitting to the relationship and her presence at the scene, but she began to prevaricate about her role as the mastermind. She claimed that because her mother-in-law caught them, she was too scared and couldn't control what she said. She insisted she had no intention of telling Hector to kill her and that his actions were impulsive. The prosecutor immediately objected, questioning why, if she couldn't foresee it, she then conspired to conceal the body and plan an escape. These actions, he argued, showed she was in full agreement with taking the victim's life. Faced with the sharp arguments, Isabella Sanchez could no longer continue her denial. She lowered her head in a silence that admitted guilt. The examination ended, and the trial moved to closing arguments. The defense attorney for Hector Gonzalez presented mitigating factors such as his client's sincere confession and remorse. Isabella Sanchez's lawyer presented the mitigating factor that she was raising a young child. But the most moving moment was when Carlos Sanchez, the victim's son, was allowed to speak. He stood, trembling, holding his mother's portrait. His voice choking, he said he had worked far from home, hoping to provide a better life for his family. He trusted his wife to care for his elderly mother. But she had an affair, and when his mother discovered it, she and her lover brutally murdered her. He spoke of the pain and shame his family had to live with. He demanded the harshest possible sentence to bring justice for his mother. Carlos's words silenced the courtroom. After closing arguments, the judge declared a recess for deliberation. Finally, the judge returned to deliver the final judgment. The judge re-analyzed the case, affirming that the defendant's actions were exceptionally cruel and went against all morality. He began to announce the sentence. He stated that the court finds the defendant's actions particularly dangerous to society and that it was necessary to apply the most severe punishments. The courtroom held its breath. The presiding judge announced the verdict. Based on the relevant statutes of the state of Arizona Criminal Code, the court finds the defendant, Hector Gonzalez, guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hector Gonzalez closed his eyes, his body going limp. The presiding judge continued, his voice growing sterner. Based on the relevant statutes, the court finds the defendant, Isabella Sanchez, guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to death. As the death sentence was announced, Isabella Sanchez let out a piercing scream and then collapsed, unconscious. Medical staff rushed to carry her out. In the gallery, Carlos and Maria embraced, sobbing. Justice had finally been served. The crowd outside broke into applause. The case was closed. Hector Gonzalez was led away to begin his life sentence. Isabella Sanchez was taken to the special confinement area for death row inmates to await her execution date. The death sentence became a profound warning. In Dos Cabezas, life eventually returned to its usual rhythm. the mesquite trees would bloom again. Elena Rodriguez's house now stood cold and empty, a silent monument to a family tragedy. Her grandson was taken in by his aunt, Maria. This case will be talked about for a long time, not for its sensationalism, but for the painful lesson it leaves behind. It shows how thin the line between good and evil can be. The case will forever remain a painful scar in the memory of the people of Dos Cabezas, a reminder that respect and love within a family are the ultimate foundations of humanity, and any betrayal of that foundation comes at an incredibly high price.